value, and that's Mr. Buster Posey. He won three Super Bowls. I was going to say Super Bowls. World Series with the San Francisco Giants, and he was great, and he's probably a future Hall of Famer, but the fact that he's got 3 home runs, and we've been talking about his power declining for many years now. 2014, he hit 22, and it's gone down to 19, 14, 12, 5 last year, and he's on pace for a little over 5 this year, actually, about 7 or 8. But, man, is he just the most empty batting average, like empty player you can find. Sure, he hits 275, but there's so many singles and so little real production out of him. He's got good defense, yeah, but I don't know. I just cannot jump on the Buster Posey bandwagon. He is really not worth anything. He's not worth a top 200 pick, let alone where they were drafting him this year.
Yeah, he just really dropped off. I actually had him last year in a dynasty league, and I had the opportunity to keep him, and I actually traded for Gary Sanchez, which was a good decision. I actually traded him to you, Dev.
Yeah.
I actually traded for Gary Sanchez from you, Devin.
I did not ever have Buster Posey, though. I'd like that to go on the record.
Yeah.
It was a more complicated trade than that for some draft picks, but
yeah, I guess, yeah. My catcher, though, I also was in the same boat as Devin. He's got a big name, and he's won a couple of World Series titles. I've got Yadi Molina.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, I guess the numbers speak for themselves. He's gotten there in age where he's going to start declining. When people talk about catchers and they talk about value, you must have thought that Yadi Molina would give you good production if you draft him around 160 to 200. And he's just really not been that, batting about 268 with about 4 home runs and 35 RBIs. He's really not been up to value. Has a lot of nights where he goes 0 for 4. Just not that great production when you can have guys like Chirinos and other free agents around.
Yeah, and I think one thing you got to talk about that is name value.
Yeah.
You know, your more inexperienced fantasy players are going to say Yadi or Molina and Buster Posey. Yeah, those are big name catchers. I've heard of them before. I'm going to draft them higher to get my catcher, and it's just not worth it. You know, if you're most of the really experienced fantasy baseball players, they're not drafting Yadi Molina and Buster Posey anywhere near as high as a lot of the general public are. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're listening to this podcast. Hopefully, you'll understand some of our tactics. And those are 2 guys we would definitely avoid. And if you have them and somebody's offering you something for them and you think it's worth it, I say get rid of these guys.
Yeah, I really don't see you getting to the playoffs and having a good time with those guys.
Yeah, let's move on to the more into the infield now. First base. What do you have at first base, Mom?
I actually have a guy kind of like Josh Bell last season, Jesus Aguilar.
Okay, yep. And he was a guy that just kept hitting home runs somehow last season, and he really kept it up. I know I had a few shares of him, just as more of a pickup as the season went along, and he decided to go and hit me about 30 home runs that season. And this year, clearly not up to those standards.
Yeah, I think he's just one of those guys who is kind of similar to Josh Bell this year. Had a lot of lucky hits last year with a BABIP pretty high. And this year, I mean, he's just struggled mightily. He's hitting about 207, 5 home runs, 26 RBIs, just a complete drop-off from last year. If you have him and somebody wants him or you just want to get rid of him, I would say drop him because nobody's going to pick him up.
Definitely. Going on to, who was my first baseman, let's ask. I went with Paul Goldschmidt, just a guy that's been in the Cardinals, and he's got some production, but really he hasn't done what people thought he was going to do, where he was drafted near the first round. As a first baseman, there's a lot of first basemen that can give you a lot of production. Almost all first basemen really hit, and Goldschmidt has been mediocre at best. And the value there is definitely not what we would expect from Goldschmidt. Moving on to second base, I went with Jose Altuve.
I went with one of the off-season pickups this year for the New York Mets, Robinson Cano.
Okay. Let's talk about Cano. He's a guy that was picked up by the Mets, as you said, and clearly not having the season they thought he was going to, because if you remember at the beginning of the season, the Mets GM was all in. He was ready to go to the playoffs this year, and it has not turned out that way so far.
Yeah, I mean, he last year came off the suspension, obviously, where he was caught with PEDs, and he obviously is a really beloved player. On the other team in New York, with the New York Yankees, a lot of people liked him before he was dealed away to Seattle, and now he's back in New York for the Mets. Not really having a great season, batting about .227 with 4 homers, about 17 RBIs. Just not a good, position for Robinson Cano. Not been great of an acquisition for the New York Mets, and I'm pretty sure fans in New York and Flushing are probably not liking that acquisition.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on to Jose Altuve, a guy that the one thing you have to look at, and I think this, obviously not all stats are perfect, but I think this stat really tells you a lot. And it's the offensive and defensive ratings combined with WAR on Fangraphs. And let's start our story of Jose Altuve in 2014. He had an offensive tool of about 33.3. He hit .341 that season with 7 homers. Next season, he more than doubles those homers. The average drops a little bit. He gets about a 15 rating. Jump to 2016. He hits .338 with 24 homers for a 45 offensive rating. He gets 53 as his offensive rating in 2017, hitting 24 homers with an even higher batting average. Then we drop down to 2018, only a 29.8 rating. So that means last season he had .316 with 13 home runs. This season, however, 1.4 currently on the offensive rating. That's a mighty big drop for a superstar like Altuve. Yeah, he's got the home runs. He's actually on pace to hit more home runs than he has in any season. Yet, hitting .250 as his batting average, and he's just not making enough hard contact, not getting enough singles. The hard contact is making, it's going out of the park. But it has not helped this team enough, and I think that's why he's definitely on my bust list.
Considering guys must have actually drafted Jose Altuve pretty high.
For sure. That's another.
We're going to really mourn the poor play and sort of look at guys who have obviously played better.
Yeah, if you have Altuve, he was probably, a second-round draft pick? Maybe he snuck into the third round, and you're really not getting what you asked for from Jose Altuve and what you needed to help your team win.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to third base. Who'd you have at third base?
My shortstop, which I picked for the overrated team, or the bust team, if you will, I actually had Ahmed Rosario.
Are we doing shortstop or third base?
We're doing shortstop.
Okay,
shortstop. So with the likes of Ahmed Rosario, I mean, it was again a really poor acquisition for the Mets. I mean, not really an acquisition. He was in their team, and he's hitting about .250 with about 9 homers. Just been a really mediocre player, especially for a guy who was really highly touted before he came into the league. I mean, he was a big prospect, and now he's just kind of ended up as kind of a mediocre player when you could have other guys who are obviously playing better.
Yeah, looking at my shortstop, I went with Gene Segura, guy that was picked up by the Phillies as an all-star last year. He has not been up to par. We look at the lineup for the Phillies, and he's got chances to produce there in Philly, but he's not getting it done. And I think he's a guy that I was not very high on to start the year. I thought he was a lot of empty batting average. I thought he was kind of the shortstop equivalent of Buster Posey. When he hit home runs, they were kind of weak, and at least Buster Posey from a few years ago, he was very good last year. But I think he definitely hit a drop off, and guys that drafted him in maybe the 6th round have not gotten what they wanted from that shortstop position.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And going to my third baseman, who I thought was a bust this year, I'm going to have to say Chris Bryant. And it's a bit of a weird one, considering the fact that Chris Bryant has really been he's been good. He's been okay. But towards the beginning of the season, he was batting about 240, 230, and he didn't have a lot of home runs. But now that we've reached the All-Star break, he's starting to pick it up, batting about 285 with 16 home runs. But for a guy like Chris Bryant, a guy who usually hits for average, he usually hits around 300 or more. And right now he's just not that. And you would have probably drafted this guy in your first 3 or 4 rounds.
Amon, I think that's the dumbest thing you've ever said, and here's why. You know another third baseman that's a bust? Jose freaking Ramirez. And let me tell you a little bit about Jose Ramirez. Last 3 years, he's played over 150 games. He hit 11 homers, 29 homers, then 39 homers. You're thinking, Jose Ramirez is a god. He is stealing bases, stealing 22, 17, 34 bases. He's a fast guy. He's walking. He's not striking out as much. He's hitting for a great BABIP, great ISO, great average, great on-base percentage, great slugging percentage. And let's look at those numbers this year. 79 games, 5 homers. He hit 39 last year. So that means to get back to that, he's got to play about 80 games and hit 34 homers, which is unheard of, and it will not happen. So he's stealing bases okay. He's right on pace for about 35. But to hit 5 homers and hit 216, lowering the walk rate, increasing the strikeout rate, the offensive tool going from 50.6 to 10.4 in the negatives. That's got to be the ultimate bust. He was drafted as the 4th best player in fantasy. And we're looking at a guy that is hurting his team. He's hurting his team. They would rather have a replacement level player than have Jose Ramirez behind the plate. And that's just insane to go from that quality of a star to just the ultimate sucking year that Jose Ramirez has had. There's no bigger bust in the game of baseball, and that's what I have to say.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you, Devin. I actually just completely missed it. I completely missed Jose Ramirez being there as a third baseman. I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, Jose Ramirez has just been completely useless on the part of the Cleveland Indians. I mean, apart from the fact that he's stolen 18 bases, which
can help your fantasy team in a roto league. It's fine.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean,
it's okay.
It really isn't much, though, if you're hitting about 216 and never getting on base.
What you're looking at right here is Malik Smith with a third base eligibility instead of outfield. That's what you're looking at right here. A guy that's fasting and do nothing else. This guy should be in the minors right now. That's how bad he's been. It's unreal to see a drop-off that crazy from a player with that caliber of performance. We almost expected it from Jose Ramirez because he kept climbing. And yeah, he's a name that is so common that, people don't often think about him. But he's 26 years old, and he's playing on the Indians. And he has been atrocious. And there's no bigger bust in the entire Major League Baseball than this guy, Jose Ramirez.
Yeah, and I bet you those fans in Cleveland up there are probably being disgusted with their team. I mean, you're seeing the Twins easily walking away with the AL Central. And the Cleveland Indians actually expected a big season, considering they still have the likes of Corey Kluber, Trevor Bauer, Carlos Carrasco, maybe the best rotation in all baseball. And you still got the best shortstop in baseball in Francisco Lindor. And you hoped that Jose Ramirez was going to give you some sort of production, as he always does, giving you almost MVP caliber seasons. But it's as if he's just been completely in disarray, and he's just not been good at all.
Well,
he's just been 0.
Cleveland's 8 games behind Minnesota, and Minnesota has the second best, or tied for the second best record in all of Major League Baseball, but Cleveland is just, they're not getting it done. They have a plus 11 run differential. That's the same as the Los Angeles Angels, who are 42 and 41 and have a plus 11 run differential. So that just kind of shows you where they're on pace to be. And it's really, the Indians just, it's just sickening to see.
And the Los Angeles Angels, if you're comparing them to the Los Angeles Angels, I mean, the Los Angeles Angels don't have any direction themselves. So
Trout and nothing.
Trout and basically you've got
Albert
bunch
Pujols'
of
contract is all else you've got on that team.
Yeah, I mean, you're considering a mediocre teams and this player who really can impact the team in a good way and bring them back in the playoff race, but you're not really seeing it right now as he's just been zero to this team.
For sure. Let's move on to the outfield. Who do you got in your outfield? 3 outfield spots.
So I had the money grabber of the free agency this year, Bryce Harper.
Bryce Harper, yes, me too. I would say big bust.
Oh yeah, and Mitch Haniger.
Mitch Haniger, okay, he was drafted at about 60-ish.
Mm-hmm. And I've got one of the big young players before the season started, Victor Robles.
Okay. Robles, I'd like to talk about Robles. Robles is a guy that I feel like, yes, for sure, he's been a bust. He's not what they expected him to, but at the same time, he was drafted at around 130. So, people can draft him higher than that, and he hasn't been all of what he was supposed to, but he's still a young player, and I think in dynasty leagues, do not get rid of Victor Robles. He is a Rafi Devers type, but he's kind of having Rafi Devers 2018, where there are some, what do you say? There's some, what's the word I'm looking for?
I think he's still...
Like, brightness. There's a speck of brightness. What's the freaking word? He's showing little hints of, he'll hit a home run or he'll steal a base, and you're like, wow, if he could do that consistently, he can be a star. And I think he still will. I still have 100% confidence in Victor Robles. But this year, it clearly seems like he's a little overmatched to the plate. He can't hit anything off speed.
Yeah, and I really think like the fans around the league and fans of fantasy baseball and fans of dynasty leagues, I mean, you're looking for these guys to produce. And with the likes of Victor Robles, I mean, you were expecting 20 stolen bases, 25 home runs, and maybe an average close to 300, maybe about 280, 270. And he's just not been that. And I guess fans are kind of concerned right now, but as you said, I think he's showing sights and like sort of shades of that he can be a good, productive major league player, but I think it's just not coming out right now. And he'll become that. I think he's still really young, and he's been in the majors for a while now, and he'll start to learn, and that's when you start to develop.
Yeah, definitely. I think Harper's another guy. He's taking the money, but you can't get rid of Harper. He's on your team for good, and don't get rid of him. But moving on from that, I think the 2 guys I had were Andrew Benintendi and Lorenzo Cain. Benintendi, simply because of his inability to hit for power, which was kind of what we thought was going to happen. But then Lorenzo Cain, I think, is another guy we have to talk about. If I were you, Lorenzo Cain, I don't have any shares of him. I've gotten rid of him. Lorenzo Cain's not my guy. He's getting old, and people who think that he can have a big rebound, I just don't see it. I say trade Lorenzo Cain, and that's my advice to you for the day. But anything else we got to talk about for the outfield, or?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to talk a little bit about Mitch Haniger, considering the fact that this guy has usually been a really, really good major league player. Like, he's always been a really productive player for the Seattle Mariners. And he was actually playing really well going back to the series in Japan when he was hitting home runs and he was getting on base and his average was really high. But now that we're about a few days away from the All-Star break, I mean, he's been injured for a little while. He's been on the IL. He's hitting around 220 with about 15 homers and 32 RBIs. And you must have drafted this guy, 60th or 70th overall. So we're talking maybe the 6th or 7th round. When you could have gotten other guys who were honestly going to be much better in value. I mean, who would have thought that Mitch Haniger would have been hitting 220, considering like how his seasons have been going while he's been in the majors. He's been a really, really good player, and that's what I expected. I mean, I drafted this guy thinking that he'd be a really good hitter of average and home runs, but he's just been really mediocre and kind of below average, if you will. I've just not liked Mitch Haniger this year.
For sure. Let's move on to some of the pitching for the Buffs team. I think the main guy that I want to get to in this, both of us have on our teams, is Aaron Nola, the Philadelphia Phillies. I'll tell you a little bit about him. So he's right now he's at 6-2 win-loss, not bad. 17 games started, 96 innings. He's striking out on a better clip than he ever has in his entire career, majors or minors. He's got a strikeout rate of about 10.31 per nine, which is better than even his great season last year. The problem is he's walking at a much greater clip. It's 3.56 per nine compared to 2.46, so an extra walk for every 9 innings. And then the fact that he's giving up 1.31 homers per 9 innings, his home run to fly ball rate has increased by about 10%. So his WAR is still okay. He's got a 4.22 ERA. The xFIP shows that it should be about 3.7. So he was a little lucky last year. But other than that, Aaron Nola's been a big disappointment.
Yeah, with Aaron Nola, I mean, I completely agree. He's just had a down season coming off a season last year where he was a Cy Young candidate, and he was honestly a really, really good pitcher for the Philadelphia Phillies. But he's just not been there. I mean, 4.2 ERA, 6-2 record. He's just not been the pitcher who the Phillies want him to be, considering the fact that they paid so much to Bryce Harper, thinking that their pitching rotation and their pitching staff in general would hold their team together and possibly get them to the playoffs. But they've just not seen that, and it's kind of hurting them right now.
One thing about Aaron Nola, too, we look at his pitch info. He's using the slider about the same amount. He's using the fastball a little bit less, using the changeup a little bit less, but the increase in the cutter, I wonder if that has anything to do with it. But the velocities are kind of the same. The slider's gotten a little bit faster. The cutter's gotten a little bit faster, but I wonder if that juiced ball has anything to do with it in the major leagues, because we know all the talk nowadays is about whether or not the MLB is juicing the baseballs to hit home runs, because we've seen home runs go up an extreme amount throughout the entire league, and I wonder if Aaron Nola is just a bad case of a guy that's getting ripped off because this home run ball, he hasn't changed parts. That really throwing his stuff the same way, and it looks like he might be getting back to it, but with this home run thing, it's almost like a Verlander-esque, like one home run a game, like Verlander often gives up. Verlander, the only time he gives up runs are with homers. And with Nola, we're seeing him give up the homers, but he's giving up other stuff too, and it's not a good look. And I think even though he's bounced back in a couple of late starts, I feel like he's not going to fully bounce back this year, and maybe it takes till next year until he gets it a little more right. So that's the main guy I have on my Buffs team that I think is a little bit controversial, because he's still pitching well, he's still gaining his team wins, but.
Yeah, and we're only at the halfway point in this season, so we still have room for these players to kind of get back on track. You could just have one bad half of the season and then come back strong, especially on a Phillies team where you've got a loaded lineup full of guys who can produce runs and give you opportunities to win. I think we'll see a rebound from Aaron Nola, considering his last 2 starts have been really, really solid. I mean, against the Mets yesterday, in fact, he had 7 innings with 10 strikeouts.
Come on, it's the Mets.
It's still like 7 innings, 10 strikeouts. So you don't see that like every day. And then again, like another like weak opponent from July 21st, they played the Marlins. I mean, it's another weak opponent, but still, he had 8 innings with 10 strikeouts, and he only gave a run. So. I mean, you're just seeing that, like, he can pitch. He's not a guy who cannot pitch. He's a really, really good pitcher, but I think he'll get back on track. He's just had a weak first half.
And I think one thing we also got to look at is, like you were saying, the quality of opponents. I think the Mets and Marlins, 2 bad offenses. He really dominated. Let's just look at his last 6 starts. Atlanta, 4 1/3 with 5 earned. Atlanta's a great offense. He's at home to Cincinnati, and he pitches pretty well. Then he's in San Diego. He gets lit up. Then he's home to St. Louis. He pitches well. This is just me looking at this, but in his last 6 starts, he's got 4 games at home. Each one of those have been a quality start.
He's had 2 games on the road and a little bit tougher offenses. He's gotten lit up. So maybe it's a Dallas Keuchel-esque scenario here with the much better at home, but Aaron Nola seems like a guy that's got a pretty big split between those two.
Yeah, so I'm still kind of holding hope for Nola. Like, I think he can be good, but I guess we'll just have to see. It's kind of like a wait and see situation with Aaron Nola.
Yeah, definitely don't give up on him now, but if you've got an outstanding offer for him, I would not, especially if it's a 1-year league. My personal opinion is get him out if you have a good chance. If you're getting a good return for him, what would be a guy you would think, just right off the top of my head, that you'd trade for Aaron Nola? What's a guy that you'd say, and this is obviously depending on what your team needs, but who's a guy that you would say, I would trade this for Aaron Nola?
Well, if we're talking about pitching, if you're talking a pitcher for a pitcher,
yeah.
I would look for a guy. That's actually a really good question. Because if you're looking for a guy who's going to give you around 6 or 7 innings a night and going to give you a quality start and give up less than 3 runs and get you around 6, 7 strikeouts, I mean, you're kind of looking at a guy like Walker Buehler. I mean, that may be kind of too high.
Right. The one guy I was thinking is, what if you get like a Luis Castillo and Jorge Polanco? What if you get like pretty good middle infielder who made the All-Star game and a Cincinnati Reds pitcher who's pitching out of his mind?
I mean,
for Aaron Nola, would you do that deal?
I mean, if I had Nola, I would probably do that deal. But if I was the person giving up those 2 players, I would definitely not give up those 2 players. Okay. I really think that's too much.
So you feel more confident in those 2 guys. What about, let's say, we'll go Castillo again. Let's say Castillo and like Austin Meadows.
I would do that deal, actually, considering Austin Meadows is having a good season. If this is a 1-year league, I would 100% do that trade, considering Luis Castillo is young.
Okay.
And Austin Meadows is young, too, and we're seeing some really good play from both of them. So, yeah, if you get a trade along those lines, I really think you should take that. It can really improve your team.
What about Dynasty League for Aaron Nola? Would you give up, let's say, Luis Castillo and Jorge Polanco in a Dynasty League?
In a Dynasty League,
I think I'd hold on to Nola.
I would hold on to Nola, too, considering the fact that you would... it's as if you're going to have that wait-and-see situation.
Right.
I would hold on to him maybe like the halfway point of the second half of the season to see where he's at. Maybe give him like 6 or 7 more starts
to
see
where he's at. If you're going to the playoffs and Aaron Nola is struggling and you're in a 1-year league, I mean...
You could
obviously, you don't want to get rid of him to another playoff team, but maybe in a dynasty league, let's say you're the 1 seed, and you've got Aaron Nola as one of your pitchers. You've got some other pitching, and you've got a lot of good pieces, obviously, because you're the 1. I say get rid of Nola, get somebody that's playing well to help you for those immediate stats to win it. I just don't think this is Nola's year.
Yeah, I'd have to completely agree with that.
Okay, moving on to some more pitching guys, I think. Did you have Chris Archer on your pitching team? Or no?
I didn't, actually. I had Patrick Corbin and Jack Flaherty.
We both had Corbin, so let's talk about him.
With Patrick Corbin, I mean, he moved this season to the Washington Nationals, and he's been okay. I mean, he's been mediocre, had about 3.7 ERA, 111 strikeouts over 99 innings. I mean, the Washington Nationals were expecting to make the playoffs this year with that lineup and the pitching rotation which they have. I mean, they've got Scherzer, Strasburg, and now Corbin too, with hitters like Juan Soto, Anthony Rendon, Trey Turner in that lineup. You were expecting some runs, but really the Nationals have not really gotten going this season. You got Patrick Corbin up in here with a 3.7 ERA. Not horrible, but not great either. You were kind of expecting an ERA close to 3, not maybe in the higher 3s, maybe 3.1, 3.2, if not 2.9, 3. That's kind of low still. You kind of wanted him to be around 3.1, 3.2, which would have been a really good plus for their rotation. But I really think that you were going to draft this guy pretty high. He's one of the better, pitchers. He's not elite, but he's still in that A-tier pitcher. If there is a platinum tier, you would be putting guys like Scherzer and Verlander and those boys. But with the A tier, I would put Corbin in that tier, but I really have not seen like that much to put him in that like golden tier yet.
Definitely. I think he was one of those guys that I tried to avoid just because he was more in that one-year wonder type of way. But last year he definitely showed some signs of that strikeout rate going up and really just like all around kind of put it together last year. And we thought it could continue this year. And of any of those one-year wonder guys, I probably liked him a lot more than some of those others like Aguiar and Muncy and guys like that. So it's good that we talked about Corbin. What about another guy that's a starting pitcher for you?
I wanted to talk a little bit about Jack Flaherty of the St. Louis Cardinals.
Okay.
Run
it down for us.
You've got a guy here who's pitching, who's pitched about 85 innings. He has an ERA of about 4.75, which is awful. I mean, that is as bad as it gets for a guy like Jack Flaherty, who last year was supposed to be one of the best like young pitchers. I mean, he was compared
he wasn't
to
supposed
guys.
to be. He was. It
I mean,
was
he
him
was.
and Buehler. Remember
Yeah,
that
it was
Sunday
him and Walker
night baseball
Buehler.
game?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's been one of the best. Like he was one of the best young pitchers, and he was compared to Walker Buehler, who this season is having a great year. I mean, he has an ERA under 3. I think it was about 2.9 if I'm correct for the Los Angeles Dodgers. But for Jack Flaherty, I mean, last year he had an ERA of, what was his ERA last year? He had an ERA.
3-something.
It was 3-something, and that was like really good. I mean, it was 3.34. Yeah, that's what it was. 3.34. That's a low 3 ERA too, which that's really, really good for a young pitcher. That was his age 22 season. So for the St. Louis Cardinals, they thought that they had a really good young pitcher. And now to come back this year in his age 23 season with a 4.75 ERA, it's just not a good look for Jack Flaherty.
Yeah, I think Flaherty's definitely a good pick. But some of the other guys I had that we haven't talked about, Chris Archer, a guy that was talked about earlier, and he was ranked higher than he should have been.
And the Pirates obviously giving away Glass now for Archer, like we talked about earlier. That's just a disaster.
Another guy I had was Carlos Carrasco. Basically, you could put on the whole Indians pitching staff outside of probably Shane Bieber.
Yeah.
But he's definitely been a big disappointment along with the likes of Kluber and Bauer. And then Darvish as well as another guy I had for Los Angeles. Definitely looking back at that trade, Yusniel Diaz that the Orioles got, and he's now a top prospect for a struggling high contract in Darvish, and the Dodgers clearly looking back at that one, not liking that trade.
Yep.
Anything else on starting pitchers, or do you want to move on to relievers?
I actually had 2 more starting pitchers, which I didn't get to talk about. I had Jay Happ of the New York Yankees and Eduardo Rodriguez of the Boston Red Sox. And with Jay Happ, I mean, you can't really say much about Jay Happ other than the fact that he's a veteran and he's kind of old now and he's just kind of declining. But that ERA is nothing to be happy about. I mean, his ERA is like, what is it, like 5-something? It's like 5.23. The only reason he has more wins than losses is because he's on the Yankees, and the Yankees are giving him run support. But there's nothing really to be happy about with Jay Happ. I mean, once in a while he give you a start, which is like 6 innings, 1 run given, 2 run given. But like with Jay Happ, you've not really seen anything to be happy about with the Yankees, and I really think that like the Yankees can find more guys. Like with the Yankees, they're usually finding more guys to upgrade their team, and it's just surprising that Happ has really been in their rotation. And then moving on to Eduardo Rodriguez, I thought that Rodriguez was going to be really good this season because last season he had a good year with the Red Sox. I mean, he was the part of that championship team, had an ERA of 3.8 last year, was 13-5 of a record. That's a really good record. And now this year with a 4.87 ERA, he's been kind of in that bunch of pitchers for the Red Sox who have really struggled.
Reason why they're so far down, but behind the Yankees.
Yeah, that's why they're behind the Yankees in the AL East.
As we saw by Rick Porcello in the first game of the London series today, not being able to get more than one out.
He actually pitched less than an inning and gave 6 runs. But that was actually the case for Tanaka, too. He gave up around 6 runs, and he couldn't get out of the first inning either in this London series. This London series is going to be interesting. I mean, you've got 2, contenders going up in Europe and playing a series of baseball. It's kind of it's just a fun time, but I don't know. It's just harder for the pitchers. What do you say?
Yeah, definitely. Let's move on to the relief pitchers now. The last part of our journey through the value and bust team, I would say 2 relievers that I have on my squadron: Edwin Diaz of the New York Mets, another New York Mets candidate, and then Wade Davis, Colorado Rockies.
Yeah, I also had Edwin Diaz, and I had Blake Trinan of the Oakland Athletics.
So Diaz, definitely a big disappointment, but let's talk about the other 2 guys. Diaz, would you give up on him? Would you trade him for something right now, or would you hold on to him?
The thing with Diaz is I really, he's still super young, and he's young to the fact that you really shouldn't give up on him. He's not one of those guys who really will blow up and be horrible. He's a good relief pitcher. He's not a bad pitcher. I really think he just needs a little bit more time, considering he plays for the New York Mets and they rarely win. There's just been not a lot of opportunities, and the opportunities which he's had, he's just struggled a little bit. So with a guy like Diaz, I would hold on to him for a little more. I think he's in that same boat as Aaron Nola, as a guy who you might want to hold on to just for a little bit more time, just to see how he does. But yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, Diaz, I would say I'd give up on Diaz right now if I were you. And I knew not to draft him in the first place because relievers that have great seasons like that often don't repeat that. We saw with the Mariners last year. There were so many one-run games. And yes, Diaz pitched great, but we saw Kenley Jansen have that one great year. We saw last year Blake Trinan have an amazing one great year. And that's why I just don't see relievers as any sort of keeper candidate because there's just so much change year over year in the statistics, and we can see that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a reason, maybe not give up on Diaz, but maybe, if you get an offer for him, I wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger because, I didn't draft him in the first place. I have no shares in him, but at the same time, he is not going to do the same as he did last year, and I don't think he's going to get close to that again. But he's a very young, high upside pitcher, so
yeah. The only reason
if you've
why
got a dynasty league, maybe not get rid of him because he can still be a closer for a long time to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only reason I thought that you might want to hold on to him is because of his age and the amount of upside that he has. But if he starts to struggle maybe a little bit more, you may want to try and pull the trigger and get rid of him. So yeah, we can move on to a guy like Blake Trinan now. He's kind of in the same boat as Edwin Diaz, as he was a really dominant pitcher last year. And this year he's just not been up to par with those numbers. I mean, he has a 4.08 ERA this year. And last year he was just maybe the best relief pitcher in baseball. I mean, 0.7 ERA last year. Had 38 saves. He was just absolutely unreal. And this year, coming back with a 4.08 ERA with about 16 saves. I mean, it's just not a good look. I think he's in the same boat as Edwin Diaz, though. He's a little older. He's around 31 years old. So if you can find a deal for Blake Trinan, I'd try and get rid of him, too.
Sure. I'd try and get rid of him.
Ha ha.
Okay. Last guy I had was Wade Davis, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory. He's in Colorado. He's not pitching well. He's definitely been a bust for where he was drafted. So I think that wraps up our value and bust team for the for July 29th, Saturday, and hopefully you guys keep watching baseball. We thank you for your listening to our first show, and just keep tuning in. We'll have a show sometime probably next week, getting that done. So come back and listen, and hopefully we can tell you a few more things. Next week we'll do a little more specific players. We'll think of some good topics to bring up. So please tune in for that. Anything else, Simon?
Yeah. I don't know. I had fun. Did you have fun?
I had a ton of fun. This was great. We love talking fantasy baseball, and if you got any questions, just hit us up. What's our Instagram called?
It's what is it? It had something to do with the strike zone. Let's see. It is the strike _zone_. So
if you've got any questions, feel free to
send us a DM.
Hit us up, and we'll definitely respond, and hopefully we can get some analysis out there for you. If you've got any pressing issues for your fantasy team, need to make any roster changes, lineup decisions, anything, we'd be willing to help. So that concludes our show, and thank you for listening. We hope you had a great time. I know we did, and we'll be here next week. So signing off from Devin Karras and Aman Panjabi. Have an awesome week.